Hello and welcome to the Tom and Dave Show. I'm Tom, that is Dave. We are two dudes who really enjoy talking about basketball. That's basically the impetus for starting this channel. And this is the first episode where we're just going to plan on doing a general overview and wrap up recap of the very shortened but very exciting NBA offseason that we aren't done with, but a lot of the dust is settling on. Dave, how do you feel today, day after Thanksgiving, on where the NBA is at?
Definitely a bizarre off season. Normally, we're waiting for months and months for all these deals to come through, and then once the deals start coming through, you have like another couple months where like random stuff can happen, like the Russell Westbrook trade last year that just kind of randomly happened in like July or August or something, well after free agency happened. Um, so yeah, a weird one. It's also truncated. It feels like the teams felt how truncated it was, especially with the proximity of the draft and free agency. Just a lot of, I don't know, I don't envy an NBA GM right now.
No, absolutely not. I think also players seem to kind of feel how truncated it was. I mean, you saw the Russell Westbrook trade request kind of coming out of nowhere, which almost felt like a consequence of, hey, we've only got a week or so before the draft, and I realize Harden might be on his way out, so I kind of want to be the first one on something out of here. But either way, short, chaotic. It almost felt like a pressure cooked NBA offseason. I wanted to
And
just
teams have to report, I think, in like a week
a
for
week.
training
They're
camp. Yeah,
starting the week before Christmas, aren't they?
they're starting the week before Christmas, and I think they have to report to training camp on like December 3rd or 4th.
That's nuts. It's funny because you have the Lakers with what, probably like 8 weeks of rest,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have the Knicks and teams like the Hawks. I think didn't go into the bubble, so they're sitting there with 8 months of rest. I mean,
Yeah.
it's going to be weird seeing the opening of this season with teams that haven't played a game in not almost a calendar year, but like most of this year, and then teams that feel like they were playing basketball at like the highest level yesterday. Um,
It's
I'm
also
excited for it.
It's got to be one of the quickest, the longest turnarounds for some of these players they've ever had in their lives. Like 8 months without any professional basketball.
Without basketball of any kind. Even, I mean, if you look at the pipeline to getting to the league, I feel like a lot of these guys are doing AAU, high school, enough basketball where they're kind of playing year round from the time they're 13, 14 years old. And now it's been 8 months without a competitive game. I mean, I'm interested to see how players adjust. Getting into the transaction side of things, though, with everything that happened this offseason, wanted to start with the Chris Paul trade. Chris Paul, it was pretty heavily rumored that he was going to be on his way out of Oklahoma City this offseason. That wound up taking the form of a trade to the Suns. The Thunder got back Kelly Oubre Jr., Ricky Rubio, 2022 first rounder, Jalen Leck, and I think one other player whose name escapes me right now. What did you think of the trade, Dave?
Um, I I think it's a pretty good win-win kind of situation. I mean, Thunder definitely they're full rebuild now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they've already flipped Rubio and Oubre. I can't even completely remember who they got back for both of those guys. Um, but Oubre's on the Warriors now. Rubio's back on the Wolves. Um, so I think it's good for them to get off that big contract, get another pick, just fully embrace, the next few years of tanking where they have
Right.
a million picks. Um, I think that works for them. For the Suns, it's really it's interesting because they're really trying to, they're going all in right now, while
Yeah.
Aiton and Booker are still, what, 21 and 22, or, still
They're
incredibly young. Um, Chris Paul is not on their timeline.
no.
Um, he is, I mean, what, 14, 13 years older than both of them?
Yeah,
Um,
he's comfortably like different generation than both of them, at least in a basketball sense.
but they, I got to hand it to the Suns that you see a lot of teams that try to do something like this where you have the good rookies, the good young guys, and you try to build around them. Um, I sort of think of like what the Kings have done over the past 5 or so years, where they have all these lottery picks and they have continuously tried to surround them with like veterans, like Harrison Barnes or
Harry Giles.
yeah, or well, they just keep signing these vets. They had Trevor Ariza, I think, for a little while. Like,
Yeah, he was a king, wasn't he?
yeah, like this feels like a much better version of what the Kings have been trying to do, where they are like, we have young players, we need vets around them. But this
Yeah.
time, the vet you got is Chris Paul, who just showed last year that he can take a pretty good but not great team to the playoffs, um, and seemed to be like better this year than he was in the past like 2 or 3 years. So I like the
Yeah.
trade.
It's almost like playing with James Harden isn't the best thing to show off your individual talents.
It's true.
I totally agree with you, though. I think the Suns are kind of trying to get that adults in the room rebuild that we've talked about sometimes, where it's like we have rookies that we've seen something from, and now we're going to try and like bring them into the real world where it's okay, yeah, you guys, you can contend in regular season games. I mean, we saw them go 8-0 in the bubble last year, and now they're bringing in Chris Paul, a guy who can make a team tick to an extent that they haven't before. I mean, even last year in Oklahoma City, he was, despite statistically being pretty similar to a lot of what he's done, he was in their top 7 lineups in terms of point differential. He was, I think, like a plus 14 in their offensive rating when he was on versus when he was off. So I think he was clearly a big part of why that team
Hmm.
overachieved a bit last year. And I mean, if you're the Suns, you've got Booker, who you know what he's capable of doing. You have Ayton, who showed a lot coming off of the suspension last year. And then you went 8-0 in the bubble. So I mean, you clearly have something here.
Yeah,
So we can't fault them for trying to go in on that a little bit.
and then
Uh,
you sign Jay Crowder, good vet.
yeah, yeah,
Um, you re-sign Saric. Um, I think I like the team. They have good depth. Um,
yeah.
they drafted Jalen Smith, um, who I really liked. Was
Mhm.
probably a reach at the 10th pick, um, but I really wanted the Heat to take him at 20. So I was very surprised to see him go off the board that early.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the one thing I'm skeptical about is how they will actually be in the playoffs, because now I think people have already catapulted them to be like they're going to be a top 6 team in the West, which is a lot of pressure. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
young guys like Booker and Ayton, I think more likely than not are not going to be great in the playoffs,
Mhm.
and Booker will probably be exploited a lot on defense. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't mean to just be a pessimist and jumping ahead to like playoff stuff with them, but that is kind of where people are putting them already.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, you think about how many good teams there are in the West. Like, one really good team is going to not make the playoffs.
Oh yeah. I mean, even this season, you had what was it? Portland, Memphis, New Orleans. Surprisingly enough, the Suns
Yeah,
all in like a mad
and
dash for that.
and Spurs.
Oh yeah, the team that just will not bottom out despite always seeming like they're a step away from it. I think going back to the Suns though, I do think that point is very valid about the fact that they're not that we're kind of moving them along pretty quickly. And I think as much as I do worry about Devin Booker defensively in playoff games, I think offensively he seems like the kind of player that can take that leap in the playoffs that we saw
Mm,
someone like Donovan Mitchell or
yeah,
Jamal Murray this year, where it's almost like, okay, yeah, I'm only 23, 24, but I'm ready for this. Like mentally, I think Devin Booker has that mentality of I have the ball, I'm going to score this possession, and I'm not scared of this moment, which can be a lot of fun to watch. But I do think we kind of forgot in all the commotion around this Chris Paul trade how good the West is and what kind of team. Like, if they're the 6th seed in the West, that's what Denver, the Clippers, round one. Like,
yeah,
Kawhi Leonard's going to eat them alive.
yeah.
So I think it's a good trade. Like, I definitely like the attitude of saying we have something here. Let's kind of push some chips to the center of the table. But I agree with you. We might need to temper expectations a bit.
Yeah, I mean, if we're thinking about it, we have guaranteed playoff teams in the West. You got the Lakers, the Clippers,
Yeah,
the Nuggets, um,
the
the
Jazz are going to be there.
the Jazz. Um,
I think Portland's going to be back there this
yeah,
year. Like they got
Portland,
better this offseason.
um, Dallas.
Yeah, that's true. They can only
Um,
go.
we're at 6 now. Um, and then for these last 2 spots, you got to pick between Memphis,
Memphis, New
Phoenix,
Orleans.
yeah, New Orleans. We're definitely, I think we're definitely missing a team here. I don't know who I'm blanking out
Hang on.
on.
I'm
Um,
running a check here. Let's look at the Western Conference.
the only teams I feel like I'm pretty confident to stay out of that race are the Thunder and the Timberwolves.
Yeah,
Um,
the Thunder are definitely moving backwards. Oh, the Rockets. I mean, we don't know what
Rockets.
the
Oh yeah,
are going to be.
yeah. It's hard to even place them anywhere.
Like if
Um,
James Harden is playing for them and just hates everyone and everything around him, I still think they wind up as a 7 seed.
yeah, it's hard to miss the playoffs with him.
Because yeah, 80% of what he's been is still one of the better players in the league. Yeah, so last year the 1 through 8 was Lakers, Clippers, Nuggets, Rockets, OKC, Utah, Dallas, Portland. OKC is probably going to take a big step down this year without
Yeah.
Chris Paul. The Rockets, big question mark. Like, could be just a 4 seed again. Could be 9 seed. We don't know.
Hmm.
I think Portland takes a step forward this year because they're going to have Nurk all season.
Hmm.
I also like, and we're going to get to them in this segment. I like some of the moves they made this offseason. But then, yeah, like it's hard to imagine Dallas being worse than they were last year. I think it's difficult to see, like, obviously Phoenix takes a step forward. It's just difficult to see who right away they leap over. Like,
Yeah.
okay, he's going to be down. But after that, it's kind of a lot of teams that are treading water.
Yeah. Yeah. A team like the Jazz feels like they're just kind of they've almost peaked out at how
Yeah,
good this team can be, but I don't think they're going to miss the playoffs because of that.
no, I don't think Utah misses the playoffs. I just think they're kind of like, I think they're a team that's very good at competing in regular season games. And then come playoff time, like some of the limitations of that team start to show their face. But moving on to another team in the Western Conference that I think had an offseason we both liked that we just mentioned, the Portland Trailblazers. They were the 8 seed last year after not having Yusuf Nurkic for the entire run up to the bubble, up to the stoppage in March. This season, they have traded for Robert Covington. They've replaced Hassan Whiteside with Enes Kanter. Rodney Hood re-signed, I think, on a 1-and-1 for like 10 mil a year. Melo came back, and I mean, obviously, I love that move. And then Derek Johnson Jr. Did I get that? Derek Jones Jr.
Derek Jones Jr. Yeah.
Knocking off the rust here. But yeah, Derek Jones Jr. And low risk flyer on Harry Giles.
Yeah.
What did you think of Portland's offseason, Dave?
I think it was good. I think uh, you list those players right now, and I do wonder how many of them will be playing down the stretch at the end.
Yeah.
And you can really only think of Rocco that will be. Maybe, uh, Stotts can figure out the good way to use Cantor. I feel like, I mean, he's already had him before, but I feel like every team tries to figure out a way to use Cantor in the playoffs, and he always comes in. This happened in the Celtics series, these
Yeah.
playoffs, in all their games. Stevens would he'd throw in Cantor, he'd get like 6 points in like 90 seconds,
Yeah,
and
you
then
get some
just
juice offensively.
and then just get washed on pick and rolls um, by any guard who can like dribble in the slightest. Um, so I don't know how you hide him, but
Yeah.
he
Well, I
can
think
get
you hide him only playing him like 12 minutes a night when Nurk is gassed out of his mind.
yeah, and maybe when the other team's going small, gobble up offensive rebounds.
Yeah. I think personally, I really liked this offseason from Portland. I think if you look at that Lakers series last year, they just felt like a team that didn't really have a lot of moves to make. Like it was, okay, we have Dame, we have CJ, we can run pick and rolls with them, ISO them. But if you kind of start to game plan around the two of them, we don't have a lot of different ways to attack. And I think they did kind of add some variety to their game this year. I mean, obviously Robert Covington can kind of change the geometry of whatever team he's on. We saw him do that with Houston last year. I loved bringing Melo back, and I will
Hmm.
talk at length with anyone who wants to listen about how I think Carmelo Anthony still has value for an NBA team. I mean, we saw him basically being a number one option in Portland for stretches of game last year in the playoffs. Like he's a wing who's ready to shoot in any playoff game. I do
Made some
think that
clutch shots.
exactly. Like the moment is not too big for him. I do love Rodney Hood. They didn't have him in the bubble last year, but I mean, if you look at 2 years ago, that series against Denver, he was
Hmm.
huge for them. Obviously, he kind of shrunk in the conference finals against the Warriors. Yeah, they went to the conference finals that year. Yeah, like obviously he kind of didn't have the best series against the Warriors, but he's another player that I think can play big minutes for them. I just think they have more players that can be an impact. I
Yeah,
also love like even though Cantor probably isn't a world beater, he's going to cost them like $18 million less than what Hassan cost them.
yeah.
So I mean, for probably similar production.
Hmm. It's an upgrade. I still think, you know, um, the nice thing about what they did is that I think the biggest problem for them the past like 3 or 4 years has been filling that three spot next to
Yeah,
Dame and CJ. And they've experimented with so many different guys there. They've experimented with like Harkless, with Hazonia.
there was an
Um,
Aminu phase.
yeah, they've tried so many different things, and none of them have really worked. And I think Covington's by far the best player they've inserted into that spot.
Well, and
Um,
also they can go small with him if they want to.
True.
Like he, technically speaking, has played the five in the
Yeah.
past calendar year. So I mean, it's just another way to attack teams that they're gonna need to kind of get shifty to beat.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, you can throw out a lineup of, um, Dame, CJ, Trent, Melo, and Rocco.
it's weird, but it could work.
It could work. You could, uh, yeah, I mean, all five of those guys can hit shots. Um,
I'm
okay,
actually I'm glad you bring up Gary Trent Jr. because I think they're also in an interesting spot where they have like a core of players, and then it's like a core of established players: Dame, CJ, Rocco, Cantor, Hood, Mello. Like you know what they are, and then they have like this group of guys where it's like Anthony
mm,
Simons, Zach Collins, Gary Trent Jr. Where it's like okay, they've shown us well. Anthony Simons hasn't shown us much, but like Zach Collins, Gary Trent Jr. have shown that they can be playable, and it's just a matter of okay, where's the ceiling here? Like
yeah,
how much can you get out of them?
yeah,
Which is
no,
not the
yeah, I mean, yeah, we didn't even talk about Collins. Yeah, I think if he can be healthy for a full year, I think he can be a pretty solid player out there.
oh yeah,
Um, yeah, Simons is interesting. I feel like a year and a half ago there was this short like 3 or 4 week span where everyone was saying I think Simons might have had a 25 or 30 point game.
there was a weird Anthony Simons like media blitz last year
Yeah,
where it was just wait, did the Blazers get a steal last
yeah,
year? We didn't see him play like, and then we didn't see him play for another year. But yeah, so that basically covers the Trailblazers offseason. I think I'm probably a little bit higher on them than you are from this, like coming out of this.
hmm,
Although I think there are valid like concerns there, especially with Cantor being your backup center. Speaking of valid concerns, the Milwaukee Bucks,
mm,
uh, coming off of a pretty decisive 5-game loss to your Miami Heat,
hmm.
uh, they added Drew Holiday for what was it, 3 first-round picks and 2 pick swaps. They added and then actually didn't add Bogdan Bogdanovic, now Atlanta Hawks 2 guard. Dave, how do you feel about the Bucks' offseason? Like, let's take stock of them right now.
I you know I I forget who was saying this. It might have been Zach Lowe who was talking about this, and he said that for the last couple years the Bucks have had this situation where they you knew two of their five crunch time guys, and
Mhm.
it's Giannis and Middleton,
Yeah,
and then the other three are kind of question marks.
yeah,
And you saw that in the Heat series, especially. They didn't. They kind of went in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it was Wes Matthews. Sometimes it was Dante. Sometimes Brooke Lopez was in there. Sometimes Giannis was playing the five. It seems like they didn't really know how they wanted to end games.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and adding Drew Holiday, at least gives them an answer there.
Yeah.
You've added one more player you're confident about.
Yeah, it's one less Eric Bledsoe.
Yeah. However, I do think messing up whatever happened with that Bogdanovich deal is like, I am thinking about him on that team and how much he would help in those late game situations as someone who can dribble and, make a play and make their own shot. At the same time, I do think Bogdanovich was very quickly becoming a wildly overrated player over the last 2 weeks. Like, he's good, but he's also just been on the Kings.
Exactly. Like, it's kind of how much of this is just somebody has to take the shots in Sacramento, and how much of it is, okay, no, this is a real aspect of his game.
Yeah.
I feel like Drew is almost like the best of George. Drew is like the best of George Hill and Eric Bledsoe kind of boiled one, and I feel like the hope would almost be, had they added Bogdan, it would be like, all right, yeah, like the better aspect of like Dante and Pat Connaughton kind of morph into this player who's better than both of them. So it almost would be like a consolidation kind of thing. But I think that point about them not knowing how to close games is valid. I worry they, like, even with Drew, Middleton, and Giannis sorted, it does still feel like they might have a couple of just varying guys in terms of like whose shot is falling tonight.
Yeah. They have big question marks. I mean,
oh yeah,
I think there's I don't want to get crazy, but I think there's a decent argument that they really didn't get much better.
Yeah.
I mean, what are the other offseason additions they had? They got Bryn Forbes and Bobby Portis.
Yeah. They lost Matthews, which might actually mean a little bit more than we're giving it credit for.
Yeah. Did they replace Matthews with anyone who can play defense at that level at the guard position? I don't think so.
No, I guess the hope is just
Drew.
Pat just more, or Drew picks up whatever Matthews' responsibility was. Dante takes the step.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, like, before they had 3 good guard defenders. They had Hill, Bledsoe, and Wes Matthews. And now they just have one?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess Middleton can guard guards, but wouldn't you rather having him guard someone bigger?
I guess the question I would ask is, if you're in the West, obviously you're going to have to go up against like the Dames, the CJs, the Jamal Murrays, the Donovan Mitchells. Now you're going to have to stop Dennis Schroeder, James Harden, Russell Westbrook. Like, guard defense in the West can kind of be an Achilles heel. Who are the guards in the East that we're really terrified of, though? Like, obviously,
that's a good point. I mean,
comes out.
Yeah.
Like, Lowry and Van Vliet in Toronto are not pushovers.
I mean, they got torn apart by Dragic.
That's a good point, actually. If the guard defense is bad enough, those players kind of materialize out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did they get anyone in the draft? I don't think so.
Not notable. No, I don't think they were a big draft team. This year.
They're also still gonna, just looking at this now, a couple guys they're still gonna be paying this year. Include Larry Sanders.
Oh.
And Mirza Teletovic.
They're still paying Teletovic?
Yeah. Who I want to say.
Is he on an NBA team right now? He can't be.
I don't think so. I want to say Teletovic had like the blood clot issues that Bosch had.
Oh no.
Like a couple years ago. I want to say that's why he's not in the league anymore.
That's very sad, actually. Though.
Yeah, no, it is. And then Sanders obviously like retired.
Yeah.
At age like 27. I mean, I respect it. He didn't like basketball enough, and he didn't want to. He said it was making him depressed, so I respect that decision. But yeah, I just look at this team, and I guess you're hoping for a jump from like DJ Wilson and Dante DiVincenzo.
I guess these are the dice you have to roll. Like, you
maybe Thanasis. Can he be good?
I guess, yeah, like, I guess this is just a reality you have to explore. Like, we're kind of pushing it all in on having Drew, um, and then hoping Giannis comes back and we'll go from there. But I don't know. I think I'm with you in that they didn't actually get that much better. They just kind of got different.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of not actually getting that much better, the Detroit Pistons were active this offseason. That is the best segue that I'm going to do in this episode. Um, so yeah, the planning doc for this episode, we just have the Pistons. I mean, what the hell? Like they were active. They gave, what was it, Jeremy Grant 2 years, 20 mil. No, 3 years, 60 mil. Mason Plumlee, I think, got 3 years, 25.
Hmm.
They lost Christian Wood. They traded Luke Kennard. They
They
still
traded
have
they traded Bruce Brown, who's also like a pretty good role player.
yeah. Um, so obviously, the easy reaction here is to be like, "What the hell are we doing?" Um, I actually like. I think there is some semblance of logic here. It's flawed, but there is some kind of like thought here.
I want to hear it.
I think okay, so I think the Jeremy Grant contract is a lot. I think you see 3 years, 60 mil for Jeremy Grant, and immediately say that is too much. And you might be right. But I think if you're the GM of the Detroit Pistons, you say, okay, yeah, we've got Jeremy Grant here, 39% 3-point shooter, like can space the floor, can guard across the front court. Um, like that's a kind of skill set that you're going to need to pay money for. Like he can rim protect, but also kind of do some wing guarding. Like he was guarding LeBron for significant amounts of time last year in the Western Conference Finals. So I think like that's the kind of skill set that's just going to cost you money. And you're a bad team. Like you're going to kind of need to overpay a little bit. The reports were that they promised him an increased offensive role, which, like, I guess, I don't know, his peripheral offensive numbers were good. Like, obviously, his shooting numbers are good. He's only taking 3 threes a game right now. If you just get him taking like 1 or 2 more, the scoring numbers go up.
Hmm.
And he's immediately the best wing slash like stretch 4 or 5 they have.
Hmm.
Um, so I think, yeah, the Jeremy Grant contract like is a little bit much, but I think he has a valuable skill set for them.
Yeah, I think it's just the questions come from the price tag. But as you
Yeah,
say, they're a bad team, not a desirable place to play. Detroit doesn't get big free agents.
no,
Um, they only got Blake Griffin because of a trade. Like
yeah,
it's hard to get guys to come there, so you got to pay up. Um,
when you do get one, yeah,
but I do wonder about this increased offensive role for Grant. I feel like I don't think of him as someone who can really create his own
no,
shot
no,
or dribble to drive. I feel like I'd have to go back and maybe really watch some Nuggets clips, but I feel like a lot of his scoring comes from like off cuts,
yeah,
where he gets a pass from Jokic or Murray, um, getting just wide open threes.
yeah,
Um, it's a lot of off ball stuff. So I just
yeah.
I don't know if you're. I mean, I'm curious to see what'll happen.
I think also if you look at this team, like you draft Killian Hayes this year, you have D Rose there, like there's room for a guy who can play off ball a lot, especially now that Luke Kennard is not one of the guys that's playing off the ball a lot.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of agree with you though. Like I don't look at Jeremy Grant and immediately say like, oh, that's a guy who like they give him some more touches. He could really be creating offense. Like he seems like an offensive player that needs to be facilitated for, as opposed to a facilitator.
Hmm.
Um, Speaking of facilitating though, they signed Mason Plumlee. Do I have the
Yes.
correct brother? Yes. Mason Plumlee. I'm sure that's going to be an ongoing game on this show. Guess that Plumlee brother.
Are
It's
the
like who's
other
that?
two? Are the other two in the league still?
Marshall absolutely is not. I don't think he ever was. Because the thing with the Plumlees was Duke only really wanted one of them. I think they only wanted Mason, but they gave Miles a scholarship to get Mason in the door.
Hmm.
Um, and then that turned into also giving Marshall a scholarship because I guess they just loved that Plumlee energy.
One of them was
But
Nick, right?
Oh yes.
Which one?
I believe that was Miles.
Okay.
Again, though, guess that Plumlee brother.
Miles also
But
got paid a couple summers ago, I think, for some reason.
yeah, was that the summer that everyone got paid? Like that
Probably.
2016, the cap jumped and money isn't a real thing anymore summer?
Yeah. Also,
Uh,
not to jump away from the Pistons, but
but
that I think it's odd that a lot of the contracts this year are a little reminiscent of that summer too.
yeah,
Especially with Grant, Gallinari, someone like Marcus Morris getting like $60 million, like
4 years, 64.
a lot of
A lot of money going around in a
money.
pandemic. Who was that Morris contract from? Was it the Clippers again?
Yeah. Um, yeah, you got 4 years, 64 from the Clippers. Um, I mean, even like the Heat with their, I signed Myers Leonard to 2 years, 19 million. Like even something like that feels pretty inflated for 13th, 14th
Oh yeah,
guy.
that's a lot for Myers.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider like per year, Plumlee is going to be getting the same amount of money as Myers,
Yeah.
basically. And
Now,
I would rather have Plumlee on my team. Like he's a guy who the Nuggets created offense through last year when Jokic went to the bench. Like obviously, very limited version of it, but still like a big who can kind of facilitate offense,
yeah,
which is a unique set.
I think we were trying to figure out what their starting lineup could be
Yeah,
last night, um, and we just we kind of landed on that. It looks like they're going to be doing some sort of Grant, Blake, Plumlee, 3-4-5,
yep.
which just sounds like a disaster for spacing and
And
offense.
yes,
I suppose it could work defensively. Um, I guess if you're the Pistons and if you're Dwayne Casey, you're thinking like, okay, Blake and Miles,
Mason,
Mason,
guess
Blake
that
and
Plumlee.
Mason can both pass.
Yeah,
They're both two bigs that can pass. Maybe that's what they're thinking here. Like this is like a unique kind of setup.
I like that though. Let's get some weird offenses in the NBA.
Yeah,
Like more teams need to be weird.
but that would look a lot better if they had a some
Oh,
shooters around them. Yeah, a Kennard or a Wood.
yeah,
Um,
actually,
I think
I think
you go.
the big question mark we landed on was just their guard rotation.
Hmm.
Like it's probably going to be some version of Killian Hayes, Derrick Rose, Zaire Smith, and Rodney Magruder on the floor at any time. Which, if you want to look at this sort of two bigs that can pass offense, uh, an aging Derrick Rose and a rookie point guard are probably one of the better combinations that you could run that with, just in terms of like, okay, we're not limiting options for like Derrick Rose isn't exactly the most pass first point guard in the league. Killian Hayes, I'm assuming, is going to take some time to adjust to the game.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I guess this is what the Pistons are looking for.
Yeah, they got Sadiq Bey. He's a
Yeah,
good 3-and-D
actually,
guy. I mean, we think he's a good 3-and-D guy.
yes, he's one of like millions of draft prospects where it's like, well, his shot looks fine. He can kind of like he's 6'8" with a wingspan. So let's see where this goes.
Yeah, and I felt like that was a big theme of this year's draft. There was like 5 or 6 different prospects in the top 15 who everyone was saying like this guy could be a great 3-and-D guy.
And like do you think that's a side product of just we didn't have the NCAA tournament, so we didn't have those guys that like jumped out at us on those big stages, or do you think that was just always going to be the focus of this draft?
It's got to be partially that I think, and like you said, I think there's, um, as we've seen in these like important playoff games, how
Yeah.
important a guy like that is, how important a guy like Crowder or Danny
Oh yeah.
Green, you know, these guys who are always going to be playing the last 5 minutes of an important game.
Yeah.
Um, they got to stock up on them, and
Touches from other players.
yeah, and you got to figure out how. I don't know, but I just don't understand. Like Bruce Brown is a good 3-and-D guy who I don't think is
Yeah.
very old, right?
No, he's young. Luke Kennard was another one. Like
Yeah,
16 points a game last year, 44, 39, 89 shooting, getting to the line more. Like he was kind of breaking out. And I don't know. I guess the thinking there was he's headed towards like a restricted free agent offer that we don't want to match.
Yeah.
Which this is where I get to the flawed logic though, where it's like, okay, we know if it was a Luke Kennard heading for an offer sheet that's going to be too much for us, why are you then turning around and saying 3 years, 60 mil for Jeremy Grant and 3 years, 25 mil for Plumlee? Like it just, I don't know where the consistency is there. And this is why I think the Pistons are where they are, because they have that lack of consistency ideologically.
Definitely. I mean, you have like the Dwayne Casey system is what you play tough. It's like I think Casey's never been like a big like X's and O's guy, and is more of like a team identity, grit and grind type of thing. And I guess that's what they're trying to create, just like a tough team of good defenders. But I don't know. It's hard to think about it until we actually see it on the floor.
Yeah.
I think,
and hey, ultimately, it's the Pistons. Like we don't expect the most from them right now, or ever really. So like good but clearly limited might just be a spot they're comfortable being in.
And there's also always the possibility that Christian Wood just didn't want to come back to the Pistons. I think people are giving them a lot of flack for losing him for such a cheap price to Houston. But
yeah,
I mean, Christian Wood primarily played the 4 for them. Primarily played the 4 when Blake was injured. Blake's healthy again, allegedly.
For now.
And I mean, it's kind of crazy if you look at those games when Blake was injured. Christian Wood was averaging like 23 and 8 or something on like really, really good efficiency, and showed that he's a really, really talented offensive player. And he probably saw Blake coming back and was like, I'm not going to be able to thrive here.
Or alternatively, he saw similar money on the table, or even like slightly less money on the table to live in Houston versus living in Detroit, and just decided, you know what? I think I'd rather live in Houston year round, which understandable logic.
Yeah. And then if Harden and Westbrook get traded, he's the
guy.
Yeah.
We're
number one
Christian.
Let's
do it. So I believe this is the point in the call where we did have a caller segment on the schedule.
Yes, he should be joining in a second.
Great. I'm going to plug my laptop in because it is almost dead.
Okay, great.
And we're back. We'd like to welcome to the show our designated Philly correspondent, James Graytalk. James, how are you?
Good. How about you, Tom?
I'm doing all right. Obviously, we brought you on here to talk some Sixers, so let's get right into it. Daryl Morey, first opinions. Go for it.
I love everything that he's done so far for the team. I think just more than the moves that he's made, I think it just shows like a real competence and dedication to Joe and Ben just to try over, knock everything down, and just give them shooters and just see where they can go. The two of them as players. I am happy with the moves that they've made so far. I think bringing in Danny and Seth Curry and drafting Tyrese Maxey are all solid B+ to A moves for this team. And I look forward to seeing what they can bring together on the court.
James, I noticed in your recap you did not mention Dwight Howard.
I'm a little bit, I don't know how sold I am on Dwight yet. He's just kind of a head case, and the only team that has utilized him well has been the team with LeBron on it. So let's see if Joe and Ben and Doc can corral him and his personality. But theoretically, he could be the best backup center in the NBA, and we have him on a vet minimum. If he sucks and he's a head case, then we just cut him and it's over.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Like he's not exactly a high risk ad at this. Well, for Dwight Howard, he's not a high risk ad anyway. I do think you have a good point there, though. The amount of shooters they've added around Joe and Ben is going to be helpful.
Is there anything?
No, go for it.
Is there anything that from this offseason that you are a little concerned about? Any holes in the lineup you think might need to be filled?
Um, right now, as it stands, and I think there's still a couple moves to be made, but Daryl said there'll probably be small moves, like fringe margin moves, like he likes to call them. But I think the lack of dribble creation that we have on the team right now is pretty scary. I know Doc likes to use Dwight, or not Dwight, sorry, Tobias in like a more pick and rolly kind of sets like that, and like he did in the Clippers. And I think maybe that'll see him having the ball a little bit more on offense in the half court, which would be exciting. But other than that, you look at the roster and you look at Shake and you look at Ben, who can kind of dribble in the half court, but then Shake and Tyrese are the only ones that you feel comfortable with the ball in their hand in the half court, and Tyrese is a rookie, so it's going to be interesting. Hopefully we bring in another point guard. I really wanted DJ Augustine, but that didn't happen. He went to the Bucks. Seems like everyone went to the Bucks. But
we did
yeah,
neglect to mention DJ in our Bucks talk.
Yeah, that feels like a big one to miss. We're knocking it out of the park here on episode 1. It's fine. Speaking of Doc, just I don't know. Are you confident in him? Like as a coach at this point in his career, you think he still got it?
I'd like to think so.
Okay.
I think he's a player's coach. That's
right.
the thing that people like to say. Brett was also a player's coach, but I think Doc kind of commands a little bit more respect than Brett Brown does, especially coming in with a championship pedigree instead of Brett. This was when Brett was here. It was his first time being an NBA head coach. And he took us from being really bad to being somewhat good. So now this is kind of a fresh slate for Doc. I think if we can utilize Tobias better, if he can be the one to convince Ben to shoot, then we're all set. That's really the key to unlock the Sixers, is getting Ben to shoot 3-pointers that are just outside of the paint. And if Doc's the guy that can do that, hats off to him. I'm happy to have him. But
so you think Ben will start to shoot at some point, or can?
At some point, yeah. I think he will at some point. I don't know if it's going to be in the next year or the next 3 years, 5 years, if he's on a different team. It's hard to project out at this point since it's been 3 years and he hasn't done it yet. But
he made that one
probably get against the Knicks, right?
Yeah, I remember it well. Arguably the biggest highlight for Knicks this year.
Yeah.
Do you think?
Yeah, I think we'll probably get like 3 to 5 Ben threes this year.
3 to 5. Wow. Feels high.
That's my prediction. Yeah, it feels high, but he made 2 last year.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Yeah, you would hope he trends upward on that.
He took 4, I think, 4 or 5, and he made 2.
40 to 50% 3-point shooter Ben Simmons is what I'm hearing.
It projects out pretty well. Per 36 is probably pretty good.
Do you think this sort of extends the timeline of Joe and Ben together? Because I feel like for the past year, especially after this playoff loss, there's a lot, despite Simmons being injured, there's a lot of talk about, it's finally time to, experiment with, looking at trades for one of them. Do you think this new regime, new coach, Morey, means that they, we're going to see a couple more years of Ben and Joe together and they're not going to just trade off one of them?
I think it's dependent on how well or poorly this season goes. Say, hypothetically, we come out of the gate this year and we suck by the deadline. If Harden's still on the Rockets, I could see us trying to at least talking about that move, Simmons for Harden. But if they play well enough, I think that, yeah, it does extend the timeline a little bit. Daryl always talks about his championship window. I don't know how big he thinks it is right now with like a 34-year-old Dwight Howard and a 33-year-old Danny Green being primary like role players on this team. But I think he wants to try to make Ben and Joe work, and I think he knows that everyone in Philly wants to see Ben and Joe work. Yeah, so we'll see. I think if it goes well, we could be in for a couple more years. But if it goes poorly, then it could be as soon as like the end of next year.
Yeah, I think that's probably my favorite thing that he's done so far since coming in is like I feel like he's done multiple press conferences at this point where he has very adamantly said like we're committed to both of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for a team that's like just constantly in trade rumors, and young players who are constantly in trade rumors. But personally, besides all that, are you at all interested in that that Harden trade?
See, yeah, it interests me from like a basketball standpoint, but from being a fan of the Sixers, these these two guys are the guys that I want to see the franchise grow with for the next 5 or 10, however many years they can. Ben Simmons is only 24 years old. Joel is what, 26, 27. I don't think like it's still so early for them, and I just hope that we can keep it going for as long as possible because I love those two guys and I think they're fun to root for. I don't think James Harden is as fun to root for as Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, but if it comes down to championships and stuff like that, right now, if you put James Harden on the Sixers, we have a better chance of winning a championship than with Ben Simmons. But it doesn't mean I would necessarily trade him.
I do think this roster is probably the best roster since you know, well, probably since the Butler Redick team. But before
Yeah.
that, it also just reminds me a lot more of the like Rocco Saric team as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I was bummed Dario went back to the Suns. I was hoping that we could make a run at him and bring him back and just have all the boys come home. But
yeah, I think I don't know. I think both with the Sixers and kind of with the Celtics too. I think they're in some ways they're in similar boats because they both have these two great young players. I mean, Brown is probably a little bit behind Simmons and Joel, but they have these young players, but the like way they've tried to build around them and the expectations for them to be great so soon, especially in the East, I think got really out of proportions for the Sixers almost. Um,
yeah,
like starting what a year and 2 seasons ago, the expectations for the Sixers were already like, okay, now where it's like conference finals or bust.
yeah, because
Yeah.
we won 16 games in a row without Joel before
Yeah,
the playoffs,
right.
and then he comes back. We win a series, and then we lose in five, or we get Marco Bellinelli and Ersan Ilyasova in here. We're in absolute win now mode, and then we lose in five to the Celtics because they're just better.
Mhm.
It's like that's when it was Ben Simmons' rookie year. Joel's like second or third year. It doesn't to really they really fast forwarded the timeline on these guys when they're just kids, and it doesn't
Yeah.
make a ton of sense.
Was that the year after they lost that Brett Brown said they were going big game hunting?
No, that was the year that they said they were going to go big game hunting. After that Celtics series, that's when the star hunting became a thing, and then we brought in Jimmy and Tobias.
Right.
It's yeah, I feel like they did accelerate the timeline with that, but
I mean, the timeline acceleration, I think, yeah, it really starts with the big, well, it starts before that, but the huge Horford deal and the huge Tobias deal um,
to be
really,
fair, I don't hate the idea of saying like we have two very highly drafted young players that we see a lot in, so we kind of want to go all in with them
mhm,
while we have them. But I do think it's important to just temper the expectations a bit. We were talking about that with the Suns
yeah,
earlier, obviously to a lesser extent because I don't think Aiton is what Joel was 2 years ago. But
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's important to remember, like, okay, yeah, these guys are 23, 24. They might not be the fullest versions of themselves yet.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's definitely important to remember those sorts of things. Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the season goes with these guys. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait. I think just the what Brett like is gonna, or no, what Doc is gonna do, just trying to unlock some of these players. I think he commands a lot of respect. So I think we're gonna get the best versions of these players that we've seen so far in their careers. I think Joel said he released, like, there was an article that came about Joel that was released by the Sixers. So take that with a grain of salt. But he says that he's been playing basketball every day for the last 2 months, which makes me excited because he hasn't come in the best shape the past 2 years.
Is Joel Embiid in the best shape of his life right now?
That's we hope every year we hear that he's in the best shape of his life. So hopefully this is
Coming in
accurate.
lean after this offseason?
Yeah. I hope he doesn't try to lay low the whole regular season like he did last year. That was his thing last year. He was like, "Oh, I'm saving myself for the playoffs," and then he puts up
It worked pretty well.
34 and 15 in the playoffs, but we get swept. So who cares?
Have we gotten any Ben Simmons shooting workout videos this offseason yet?
He posted an Instagram of him standing at a 3-point line and the follow through. The ball's like right above the basket. Don't know if it went in or not, but
I think
that's the only thing we've gotten so far.
We'll call that a make.
One more time.
We'll call that a make for now, just for,
Yeah, I think so.
For the sake of the Sixers.
I think so. But yeah, Ben's really good about getting people to take his picture when he's in the gym. I want to see more Joel gym pictures, but if I can just get Ben gym pictures, then I'm happy.
So just to sort of wrap this up, where do you think is the Sixers like floor and ceiling for this season?
Floor. Okay, so the floor is out of the playoffs, I think, just because you look at the East. I think there are a lot of teams that are getting better in the East, whether it be the Hawks, the Nets. Who else is good? Yeah, the Hawks and the Nets are the kind of the ones that I'm thinking are gonna like jump the Sixers in the standings potentially if everything goes poorly.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Hornets.
Maybe
it's gonna happen.
Probably not. Yeah, with Gordon, but
mm-hmm.
I think the floor is out of the playoffs just because like you can bring these guys in if they don't work together or the defense falls apart. Because I don't know who we're starting at this point. Are we starting Matisse? Are we starting Seth and Danny? Like, it feels like there's a piece that is missing so far.
Just a lot of moving parts right now.
Yeah, and I would love to see Matisse develop into a starting caliber player, but like he's a walking turnover on offense unless he's catching and shooting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of scary. But yes, so I would say the floor is out of the playoffs, but the ceiling, is being a team that just starts shooting lights out and has two dominant interior players, two dominant defenders, and then a bunch of young, long guys on defense around them that can pull up and hit threes when they get kicked too. And I think that team is like definitely a conference contender,
especially in this East.
Yeah. What do you guys think? Where do you project the Sixers?
I actually am like kind of high on them, honestly. I think they could be good just because I think the Bucks are still number one. Despite my hesitations with them, I find it hard to believe that they won't be the 1 seed. I think the Nets are going to take a while to figure out. They're not going to have it right away. They'll be a killer playoff team, but I think in the regular season, when are these duos immediately great? It's really just LeBron and AD that were immediately great, like historically. And then you have this sort of like mishmash of teams, like the Heat and the Raptors and Boston,
Celtics,
the Celtics,
Indiana.
who I think, and Pacers. The Celtics, I think, got a little bit worse. So I could really see the Sixers being the 2 to 4 seed this year.
Yeah.
I could see a situation where the top 3 are Bucks, Sixers, and then like one of Heat, Nets, Raptors. I think that would be my prediction. I don't know. I feel confident about what they did.
Nice. Tom, what are your thoughts?
I almost kind of agree with David on on being a little bit higher on the Sixers this year. Like when I first heard it, I was a little bit surprised, but then the more you think about it, the more like you can kind of talk yourself into what they've done this offseason. And like even with bringing in a few new shooters, they still like the core of this team is still pretty solid. I think the Nets are going to take some time to figure out. I almost wonder if it's going to be like, I think it was 2 years ago in the West where Golden State was the 1 seed and the Rockets were the 4 seed. and you had like this 1-4 series in the conference semis where it was like, okay, yeah, these are clearly the two best teams, but then the two over here are also going for a trip to the finals. It was Portland and Denver then. I could almost see it being like a Bucks versus Nets 1-4, and then I don't know, a Sixers Heat, Sixers Celtics 2-3 matchup. So I feel like the ceiling for them is probably like one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the East. And then the floor is, I don't know, we get to the trade deadline and we're talking about where Ben Simmons goes.
Yeah, that's what I think too. If we have to trade either of them this season, then the season was a failure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, I can't wait. I'm so excited for the season to finally start again.
Same,
and I feel like I say that, and it's like it just ended like a month and a half ago.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, James.
You're welcome. Thanks for letting me talk to you guys.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure we'll have you come in
A good time.
throughout the season for more
Yeah.
Sixers updates, depending on whether things are going well or poorly. Hopefully things are going well. I think they're going to go well. I think I'll book it now. I think the Sixers. I think they're going to be the 3 seed.
3 seed.
3 seed.
I'll
3 seed.
say 4.
I'm going to say 4 as
But
well.
is that above or below the Heat, Dave? Are you not confident in
asking the hard questions?
I want to see how the Heat start.
Okay, fair enough.
The thing is, not to get too much into the Heat, but we were so much better once we started playing Bam at center in the bubble.
Yeah.
So I just curious what's going to happen there. Are we going back to the Myers, Leonard, Bam 4-5? I hope not. But we also just paid Myers Leonard $9 million, so we didn't pay
You
him
did pay Bam $150 though.
True, we paid him a lot more. But I think the hope is a starting lineup of Jimmy, Duncan Robinson, Bradley. Actually, I'm not even sure. Harkless. Maybe Tyler gets to the starting lineup. I don't know. That's another topic. Kind of a mess. We have too many guards right now.
I'll take one. Give me Kendrick Nunn. Give me Terrence Ferguson.
Kendrick Nunn will actually play for you though.
Yeah.
I don't think is Ferguson gonna play.
No, he's definitely not gonna play.
All right. Thanks, James.
I'll catch you guys later. See you, boys.
All right, and we're back. I want to say thank you to James Gray Talk for coming on, talking Sixers with us. I think I came out of it higher on the Sixers than I went into it. But now we're going to transition into a couple of the teams James mentioned as sort of Eastern Conference risers. The Hawks, we've got Hawks Talk, and we've got Punching a Hornet's Nest, our Hawks and Hornets segments. So we're going to start with the Hawks. A team that was surprisingly aggressive, given that their best player was year 2 Trae Young last year. They went out this offseason. They gave Rajon Rondo, I think it was 2 years, $20 million. Danilo Gallinari got like 4 years, 72.
I think he got
Bogdan was 72.
Danilo
Gallo
got the same as Jeremy Grant. He got the 360.
360. Okay. Gallo got 360, and then of course, this would be incomplete without mentioning the Solomon Monster, Miami legend Solomon Hill. I think looking at these moves off the bat, it's obvious the Hawks got a lot better. I almost think they're doing a similar approach to what the Suns, a similar approach to the approach the Suns took, where it was, okay, we've kind of compiled our young pieces. We like what we have. Now let's try and move the timeline into we're a playoff team.
Yeah.
What's your gut feeling about these moves, Dave?
I like adding Rondo. I like adding Chris Dunn. I'm a little tough, a little confused on getting Gallo and Bogdan, and
Yeah.
this is not just to like white European players are all the same thing, but they are really similar players, and have similar strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
The only difference I think is that Bogdan is more of a 2 and a 3, and Gallo is more of a 3 and a 4.
Yes.
And I think Gallo played a lot of 4 last year for OKC.
Yeah.
So I guess that's something, but at the same time, you still have John Collins, who
Yep.
I feel like people are forgetting has been really, really good at certain stretches of his career so far. And they just got a lot of bigs. They still have Clint Capella.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of confused on the lineup makeup, and I think if you're putting out a lineup that has Trae Young, Bogdan, and Gallo, that's a tough.
You're going to get scored on a lot.
Yeah, you're looking at games where both teams are scoring like 140.
Oh yeah.
And
which might be just the way. This might just be what Hawks games are this year. I would love to watch. And I mean, I guess if you're going to bet on offense, Trae Young is one of the better players to center that approach around. But I do agree with you. Like it's a little bit confusing. I think they've kind of created log jams in the front and back court with these free agent signings. You have Clint Capella in there. He's probably going to command some starting minutes. Gallo, the report was that he signed knowing he would back up John Collins, but that feels like something that you say to make it make sense externally. And then they just have a lot of players that it's like guys you would like to see get some game minutes on their roster right now. Like Cam Reddish probably gets buried in the depth chart at this point. Kevin Huerter probably loses whatever starting minutes he was getting to Bogdan. DeAndre Hunter probably sees a lot of his minutes and his shots go down. And so while it probably will move them forward ultimately, it just feels like you're kind of punting on a lot of guys that you invested in pretty recently if you're the Hawks.
Yeah. And I'm looking at this team now, and I think what's weird is they doubled up a lot.
Yes.
Like, obviously Rondo is a significantly more talented like playmaker than Chris Dunn is, but
yes.
And you're bringing him in for veteran leadership, I guess. Although Rondo has not really a reputation of being a good vet or leader or someone who likes to defer to other people. And
we know about that.
The best, he's deferred when he's playing with LeBron James and Anthony Davis.
Yes.
Where you would be stupid not to.
But Rondo is going to be the smartest and oldest guy in the room.
Yeah.
Every day in Atlanta.
So you've added 2 point guards who can't shoot.
Yeah.
You've added 2 wings who can't defend.
Yep.
You added Solomon Hill, who's not going to play, probably.
Culture guy, Solomon Hill.
And you drafted Onyeka Okongwu, who a lot of people really like. I'll be honest, I don't know a ton about him. I just know he's getting some Bam Adebayo comparisons. But I think that's just people being hopeful, trying to figure out how you find the next Bam. And you're just looking for are they athletic, but they can also pass?
Yeah. Couple his feet. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Bam, do that.
Yeah.
I think Okongwu is also even if he's a good prospect, he kind of ties into this logjam idea of if he does have Bam-like tendencies, where are we going to see them? Because realistically, if Capella's your number 1 center, do you put Collins at the 5 as a backup center? Is Okongwu going to be able to beat out Bruno Fernando for minutes right away? If you are going out and trying to win regular season games, I just feel like there are a lot of guys on this team whose development is not going to be a priority this season. So I think there is reason to be hopeful if you're the Hawks. You are going to be a better team than last year. It's just looking at what the opportunity cost of that is going to be.
Yeah, it feels like if we're comparing them to the Suns, the Suns had players with pretty defined roles, already.
Yeah.
Whether it be Mikal Bridges,
Mhm.
Cam Johnson, obviously Book and Ayton. This Hawks team is a lot less defined, and their young players are a lot less defined.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I feel bad for someone like Reddish. I hope he can get out of there. He's not going to he probably won't play, and this is a bad environment for him to be in now, where it's a
Yeah,
team
he's
that's
getting yelled at by Rajon Rondo every day.
yeah, and it's a team that's now expected to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I'm looking at Gallo right now, and last year, according to Basketball Reference, Gallo played 98% of his minutes at power forward. That's the most he's played in his career. I don't know if they're going to shift him down to a 3.
I mean, the good thing is, as players get older, they do always move from the 4 to the 3 and not the 3 to the 4. So this was perfect.
Yeah. So what's going on with Collins? Are you trading him?
I feel like it makes a lot more sense if you didn't trade for Capella in the middle of last season, like
Yeah.
these moves, because then you can just say, all right, yeah, we'll just shift John Collins up and go a little bit smaller, and then we can play Gallo at the 4. We can start Bogdan. We can probably start either like one of Rondo, Chris Dunn, or I don't know, if you really want to get wild and start Herter in this lineup, you could, and just get absolutely torched on defense, but you could do it.
Mm-hmm.
But with Capella in there, it kind of locks you into not making the most of one of Gallo, John Collins, or a slew of players after that.
Yeah. It feels like one of them has to go.
Yeah, almost like the Hawks are a team with one move left to make.
Yeah. And, he only played 41 games last year.
Gallo?
No, Collins. But,
Oh,
I mean, I think I hadn't looked at these in a while. The Collins numbers are ridiculous.
yeah.
He averaged 22 and 10
Yeah.
on 58% field goal percentage and 40% from 3. And 80% from the line. These are like Towns-esque efficiency numbers for a big guy.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know. I think you're kind of hurting yourself a little bit if you're going to have to split his minutes with Gallo. He's also only like 22.
Yeah, but there's a chance he gets better this year.
Yeah.
He's on. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. Hopefully this works, because it'll be a lot of fun if it does.
Yeah.
Like if we wind up seeing Hawks playoff games next year, they're like 140 to 135. That'll be entertaining.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely an upward move, even if it's kind of a confusing one.
Yeah.
And speaking of confusing upward moves, let's move on to the Hornets' nest.
Mm-hmm.
The Charlotte Hornets. The big deal was 4 years, $120 million for Gordon Hayward, who is, I think, 29 right now, going to be 30 this year. Can they be a playoff team with this roster as it's currently constructed? Like, they drafted LaMelo Ball, what was it, number 3 overall this offseason? Obviously, they added Hayward. Last year, they kind of discovered that they had some actual NBA players on this team. Like, we had the big Terry Rozier contract. Devontae Graham came out of nowhere, became like an 18-point-a-game scorer. Actually, one of the more exciting players in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Miles Bridges definitely looked like a competent player. PJ Washington was able to start some games for them last year. Like, they've got pieces. The question is just, what exactly does that amount to? What do you think?
I'm pretty high on LaMelo. I think he can come in and be a really, really fun player from the get-go who helps you win. I do think he'll probably be very erratic, and he'll make some boneheaded plays that end up on like Shaqtin' a Fool. But I like him, and Hayward is a good steadying force. I just don't know if the rest of the team is really there. I mean, I think you're really you have a weird jam here of Graham, Rozier, and Ball that I don't know how you solve. Yep.
Like, are you starting LaMelo at the 2? Are you moving Graham over? One of them is going to move to the bench.
And if it's Scary Terry, he's requesting a trade as soon as he gets moved there.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole reason he's here is
Yeah.
because Boston wasn't giving him starter minutes. I think they almost, speaking of Boston, they almost kind of fall into that like a light version of that Celtics problem where it's, hey, our top 7 can go.
Mhm.
Like we've got 6 or 7 guys that we know can play real minutes and be good players, and then after that we have nothing.
Yeah.
Um,
Because
I mean,
Zeller's like actually a solid center.
he's good enough, yeah.
Yeah.
Like he's not the centerpiece of your team, but he doesn't need to be.
He's average. He won't make you lose.
Exactly.
I mean, do we think Malik Monk can make a jump? Is that happening anytime soon?
I wouldn't feel great betting on it.
Yeah. And that's just another guard too that needs the ball in his hands. So yeah, I feel I'm gonna be honest. Before we started talking about this, I was higher than I am right now. Kind of scrolling through their roster, I just don't really see the winning lineup here. But
like, is it moving PJ and like PJ and Graham, who might have been 2 of your best players last season, to the bench and saying, all right, yeah, you are our offense when LaMelo and Rozier go off or when Hayward comes off? Like, even then, I don't feel great about it because you're moving 2 of your top players out of the starting lineup. Like,
yeah,
the problems become more apparent the more we talk about this.
yeah. And is it official? Have they stretched Batum? Is he off the team? Do we know?
They're still trying to make that Gordon Hayward deal a sign and trade where they flip Batum. And currently Sam Presti and Worldwide Wes are just, I assume, fighting each other in an alley somewhere for the right to take on Nick Batum's contract and a first-round pick. They're working on it. I wouldn't be surprised if they find a way to do it. But even then, like, you could remove Nick Batum from the equation and this team would still have a lot of problems that aren't going away.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. Batum has been bad the last 2 years.
Oh yeah. It's a horrible contract.
Yeah, not bad contract and not really a positive player anymore.
No. And yet they, like, I almost think they're gonna be there at the end of the season, even with all of this slop.
They could be in that play-in game.
Yeah,
I think that's where I'm gonna put their ceiling. Is that they could be there.
They'll be in the tournament for the 8 seed.
Yeah. To say something positive,
the 8 seed last year, and they're adding Gordon Hayward and LaMelo. It's not outside the realm of the possibility.
That's true.
You were going to say something nice about the Hornets, though?
Yeah, they have. I mean, it's a weird one, but they have an identity, and I think that's a fun thing that I was looking around. Like a fun thing to look forward to the league this year is if you look around the league, almost every team has an identity of some sort.
Yeah.
And I sent we were laughing about this weird tweet that SportsCenter or ESPN put out like a few days ago after they got Hayward. That was like the new duo in Charlotte, and it was a picture of separate pictures of LaMelo and Gordon next to each other that they just Photoshop to make them next to each other.
I can't imagine we're going to get many pictures of Gordon Hayward and LaMelo Ball together.
No,
at this point,
probably not.
They don't seem like people that are going to hang out.
No, but they are players that people know. And I am sure the LaMelo Ball Buzz City Hornets jersey is going to sell great.
Oh, it's going to do numbers.
And that's something. And we'll have a couple games where we have some insane LaMelo to Bridges alley-oop, which will be fun.
I really thought you were going to finish that sentence with LaMelo to Zeller, and I was just going to laugh.
Maybe. I don't know. Can Zeller jump that high?
The light blue and purple LaMelo ones on Big Baller Brand are going to sell numbers.
Yes.
I'm sure of it. They seem like the exact kind of sneaker that 12-year-olds are going to buy in bunches.
And we haven't even talked that much about Hayward here, who for a few games last year before he broke his hand was very good.
Yeah. Boston was I think in the playoffs when Boston didn't have him, we kind of got into this space of oh yeah, they don't need him. But no, they're concretely better with Hayward than they're going to be without him. I think he comes into Charlotte and is probably the best player on this team the second he arrives there. I think he could have a resurgent season. It's just a matter of how far that takes them.
Yeah.
Because there is such question marks around him.
He'll probably average the most shots per game on this team.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So, yeah, I mean, I think when he was, before he broke his hand this year, this is such a small sample size. It's like 8 games. Yeah. But he had this 8-game stretch where he went like 25-4 on like really solid efficiency.
Yeah.
This was like the first 8 games of the 2019-2020 season, and he looked good.
Right.
He looked better than Jalen. He looked like the second or third best player in that Celtics team. And I think maybe he can thrive in Charlotte after this, experiment in Boston gone wrong, where he's been the odd one out for 2.5 years now. After coming in, being embraced, like it's his college coach, it's homecoming.
Forgot about that angle.
And it all went wrong. So hopefully.
Yeah, I think at some point it just became this is what Gordon Hayward in Boston's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
You hope that he can turn it around because, again, when he's good, he can be fun to watch.
Yeah.
But while we're on Boston, we've kind of touched on it a couple times in this show. They've gotten worse, right? Like this has been a step back offseason for them.
Yes, I agree. The 2 moves that they did that were notable were signing Tristan Thompson, which I don't hate.
And he always gives them fits when he plays them, so I feel like bringing him in is a good, like, if you can't beat him, join him, or get him to join you kind of thing.
He's been good. He's a proven playoff guy.
Yeah.
Who will do more for them than Robert Williams can, most likely.
And more for them than Enes Kanter could.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things. Because, I mean, we've touched on it earlier in the show. Like, Enes Kanter came in a couple times in the playoffs, and it was like, oh, wow, that was a 10-point swing in, like, 3 minutes of Enes Kanter. That's weird. Mm-hmm. But then the more you played him, the more that kind of went by the wayside. So I think, like, he is an upgrade. With what the Celtics do with their centers, I think Tristan Thompson's an upgrade over Enes Kanter. I do think losing Hayward is going to hurt them a little bit more than we're giving it credit for right now. Mm-hmm. I think replacing Brad Wanamaker with Jeff Teague feels like an upgrade. Just because I think Jeff Teague at this point in his career is not the Jeff Teague that was like 1/5 of the player of the month that one year for the Hawks.
He was an all-star.
Yeah. Former all-star Jeff Teague. Like, he's not that anymore. But I feel like he's going to be better than Brad Wanamaker. Like,
you can hope.
How many times last year when the Celtics were playing and Kemba came off the floor did we immediately say to each other, they need someone to replace Brad Wanamaker minutes?
Yeah. Well, that was a big problem all playoffs of just who is their 8th person.
Yes. Yes.
And they didn't solve that problem.
No, like Grant Williams got some run at it. I think Time Lord got some time, but ultimately wasn't really panning out. Shemi was on the court sometimes, which I love me some Shemi, but I feel like in a playoff series, he's going to have his weaknesses exposed. That 8th player is kind of a important question mark for them. They lost one of their top 7. So
yeah, I guess you're hoping for the Grant Williams leap. I mean, not like a real leap. He's like a good role player, plays some good defense.
Like Grant Williams leaping from like your 9th guy to your 7th guy.
Yeah,
which would be a valuable move for them though.
And then you have all these like weird guards at the end of the team.
You got the Island Misfit toys.
Edwards and
Romeo Langford,
who I think barely played at all last year.
Tremont Waters is there.
I just,
I feel like Carson Edwards last year was like all right, if we were still really in this, we would be giving these minutes to Wanamaker, but because it's a 17-point game with 3 minutes to go, we're just going to get some burn for Carson.
Yeah.
I think
one thing we keep going back to, and I think it is an important thing for any of these playoff teams, team
Yeah.
like Boston that was 2 games away from making the finals.
Yeah.
It's who are you adding that
Yeah.
can play at the end of that game 6 against the Heat, you know?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And Tristan can.
Yeah.
I think
He
Tristan definitely can. I don't know if Teague can. I know he's still. I know his background and everything, and I know he has the experience. But I mean, you look at his numbers last couple of years; he's gotten pretty bad.
Yeah.
And maybe being on a winning team will help him because he's been kind of stuck in Minnesota now for a couple of years. And
Did he go back to Atlanta last year?
oh, he did go back to Atlanta. You're right. The
But
homecoming.
another not exactly winning team
Yeah.
last season.
So maybe this motivates him. But either
Yeah.
way, I think if it is an upgrade over Wanamaker, it's very slight.
It's negligible. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, they added one guy who can play in those important games, and they lost a major guy who played in those
Yeah.
important games.
One of their top 3 or 4 players. It's a step back. I think it's also interesting looking at the Celtics because they're kind of out of the space that they were in starting way back when they traded Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, and Ray Allen was gone by then. When they traded Pierce and Garnett, I think they got Gerald Wallace back in that deal.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that deal kind of started them on like this decade-long stretch of being the team that always had a ton of assets, always had a ton of picks, and anytime a star player was unhappy, whether it was Jimmy Butler, whether it was Paul George, I'm trying to think. There's someone that I'm missing
Davis.
in my mind. Sorry?
Davis.
Yeah, Anthony Davis was another one where it was like, hey, the Celtics can offer a lot of picks. They've got that Memphis pick. And for like a few years, they were always in that space. And this is kind of, I don't want to say the end result of it, because obviously these are all ongoing things. Like they're going to have more seasons, but they're no longer that team. Like this is, you went on, like you traded for Kyrie. That's fine. Isaiah Thomas never really was what he was that one season in Boston. Jay Crowder is a good role player, but obviously you can give that up for Kyrie. Ante Zizic never really became much in the NBA. So you trade for Kyrie, Kyrie leaves. You sign Gordon Hayward, Hayward leaves, and now you're into the
and
point
Horford.
Of like, yeah, actually, Al Horford, who was like the one that kind of started this this generation of the Celtics being an Eastern Conference contender. He's gone now. Like it feels like that process is kind of wrapped, and now it's fully Jalen and Jason leading the charge for the Celtics. And I feel like they're not as good a team as they were last year, which, excuse me, there's obviously a chance that Jason Tatum gets back to that level he was at right before the league shut down in March, where it looked like he was going to jump into one of the top 10 players in the league. But it is just interesting to look at what the Celtics have been for the past decade and what it yielded for them when, especially with a team like Oklahoma City kind of taking that approach now, where it's, okay, yeah, we're just going to get a ton of picks. We're going to be that team that anytime a star player comes up, we've got the contracts to match him and we've got the picks to make teams want to trade him to us. And I mean, the Celtics obviously never really, like, they went in for Kyrie, but they also didn't pull the trigger multiple times.
Yeah. The thing is about all of those guys that we have listed that they got, and including Kemba, none of those guys are top 6 or 7 players.
No. And
the best was Kyrie, and everyone else. Horford was a good piece, a good fit for that team. Stevens got probably the best out of Horford that any coach has gotten. Hayward had the unfortunate injury problems.
Yeah, Hayward's the kind of thing you couldn't have predicted before it happened.
They were also in the Durant sweepstakes. Like, there's just so many guys that they almost got. And, there's those stories last year or a year or two ago of, they could have gotten Davis if they traded Tatum.
Yeah, which I don't hate not pulling the trigger on, but it's interesting to see them just kind of shifting what their identity is.
Yeah.
And, like, the way we're going to talk about the Celtics is changing.
What is the point of getting, accumulating all those assets if you're not going to trade them?
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of those picks didn't really turn into what we thought they might,
Mm-hmm.
which I guess that's the dice you roll. But I think it is looking at the way a lot of people said, oh, well, you can't trade the Memphis pick. Oh, you can't trade this pick. And for what? Like, where are we now? You have two picks that you kind of, I don't think the Jason Tatum pick was theirs originally. I think
That was a Brooklyn.
that was a Brooklyn
I
pick.
think both Jason and Jalen were Brooklyn.
Okay. So yeah, you got your two stars out of those picks, and then a lot of like the peripheral moves where it was, yeah, we're just going to compile assets, didn't materialize into what they could have.
Mm-hmm. And now
But
you're
like I
left
said,
with this team that is, I don't know, I feel like severely lacking in good role players.
yes,
Those periphery guys. None of these late, like first round picks or second round picks that they've had that they've accumulated forever have turned into anything. These are the Edwards and the Langfords and the semis.
the Time Lords.
Yeah, these are all guys who I'm pretty sure they got through various trades, accumulating assets, and
Yeah.
only Time Lord has become a player who's even plays for them.
Yeah. I mean, Grant Williams will get minutes, but it's just a matter of like, is Grant Williams the best guy to be getting minutes for them right now?
Yeah.
But like I said, this is just, it's something that's on my mind because we're seeing OKC kind of move into that role. We're seeing Houston look to take on a lot of picks and a lot of like bad contracts to attach to those. And I just think it's funny seeing teams or it'll be interesting seeing if they learned from watching what the Celtics did and didn't do as they move into this next phase in their organization. I think OKC is also an interesting one because like they're compiling all these resources with Shea already in the building. So it's like, okay, yeah, we've kind of got one of our cornerstones.
Yeah.
Now we're moving into the process of we have all these assets. We can trade for anybody who's available.
That's true. Although,
and like Boston, they're doing it in a place that's not necessarily like the most attractive to players.
Yeah.
Obviously, Boston is a step up from OKC, but it's still, it's not LA. It's not Miami. Like,
yeah.
At some point, you kind of need to. Not everyone's going to want to play there.
I do wonder with those OKC picks and everything.
Yeah.
Who are you pairing with those picks to get a good player besides Shea? Because you can't. I mean,
yeah, it's a good point.
It depends also on, if Kawhi and Paul George jump ship this summer from the Clippers, those picks become so valuable from the Clippers.
Especially next year when it's the first year where we're bringing high school players out.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you sell somebody on Lou Dort, but even then he's not getting paid enough to match. They've got $28 million of Al Horford, so he could be part of a deal. They got $10 million of Andre Roberson, $7 million of Darius Miller, $9 million of George Hill. Like they've got a few contracts they can kind of cobble together.
Yeah, they can. Yeah.
To get someone, but it's just a matter of like how many picks are you going to have to give up at that point. Although going back to what we were saying with Boston, like maybe you don't hold those picks too close to your heart because there's no guarantee of what they will be. So yeah, and like I said, that's just, it's funny looking at the Celtics this year because this feels like the first year of, okay, like it's go time. The building process is done and this is what it has yielded. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah. It feels like that, but it also feels like the most pessimistic Celtics year.
Yeah, true.
The last couple years, I think, there was all the optimism of these, like, I mean, they were developing, like, practically super teams of, like, the Kyrie, Jalen, Jason,
Hayward,
Horford lineup.
Yeah.
I thought that was going to be great. I thought that was going to be like a top 3 or 4 team in the NBA.
Yeah.
So now it's like my expectations for the Celtics are like I can see them in the 4 or 5 seed.
I think it's the first year in a while where the sky doesn't feel like the limit for them.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of all right. No, we see exactly where this team might fall short.
Yeah.
And
then
so
it really brings up the question of, do you break up? I mean, Jason and Jalen are very complementary players. You can't. There's not the same arguments with the Simmons and Embiid, who are not very complementary young players together. Jason and Jalen are. They feel like they're pretty much both good at the same things. With
I think Jason Tatum's game is a little bit more polished offensively right now.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like Jalen doesn't have an offensive game. He does. I think also Smart feels like a great player to put next to both of them. Just like a very winning basketball player. I think we joke a lot about like guys who make winning plays, and that being like such a kind of nebulous definition. But like you look at Marcus Smart, and it's legitimately like a guy who makes plays that win you games. Like whether that's taking 2 charges on James Harden at the end of a game, whether it's making 7 threes in a given night, just he can be a difference maker.
Yeah.
And so like they have pieces. Like I don't want this to sound too pessimistic about the Celtics. Like a lineup of Kemba, Smart, Jalen, and Jason, and probably Tice or Tristan Thompson, still really good. Like still giving a lot of teams a really tough matchup. It just feels like for the first time they're not like trending overwhelmingly upward. They're just kind of leveling off.
Yeah. And I do think you look at last year, and again, I'm a Heat fan, so I don't mean to, this isn't meant to say like anything about that Heat Celtics series being the wrong outcome or something, but you look at it for the Celtics point of view. If I was a Celtics fan, I would think that was a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah, it's a series you want to win at that point. Like once Milwaukee's out of it.
Yeah, the best team's out of it. You have this quote unquote overachieving team. You're the more experienced team with actual conference finals experience and everything.
Yeah,
and then you lose it in 6. And one of the reasons you lose it is because you blow the first 2 games. You blow 15-plus point leads in the first 2 games in the second half, and just have this mental breakdown in those 2 games, and you end up losing the series. And I do think that'll probably be, if the Celtics do nothing, this core does nothing, they don't make the finals. If this is OKC 2011, again, I do think you do look at that series against the Heat and think that was probably when
that was the chance. Yeah. Because even when they were there against LeBron a few years ago, it was like, all right, they'll be back here.
Yeah.
Well, this year they were back here, and that's what happened. And you don't, like, these aren't guaranteed opportunities. There's a chance you come up against Milwaukee this year and they've figured it out and they roll you. So.
Or they come up against Brooklyn and they're firing on all cylinders and they figured it out.
Yeah.
I mean,
which would be terrifying.
Kevin Durant is one of 2 people who we've seen. There's only 2 guys who we've seen can beat LeBron, or go toe to toe with LeBron in important playoff games, and it's Kawhi, and one is Kevin Durant. And I mean, Kevin Durant was better than LeBron in some of those Warriors series. Obviously, he's coming off an injury. That'll be tough. This team, the Nets team, we'll save this for our preseason discussion, but like the Nets team just feels like a complete, I have no idea what's going to happen.
They're intriguing.
They have too many players that can handle the ball, like just lots of different issues there.
Yes.
But that's another team that the Celtics might go up against and just get rocked by.
Yeah. Like it's...
Because who can guard Durant?
Just a different... Their status in the conference is different than it has been. But that about covers everything we had on our docket for today. So thanks for doing this, bud. Also, thanks again to James for coming on. And we'll probably be back in a couple weeks with a season preview. So stay tuned.